so ungrateful? I think one of the reasons we're ignorant. I think sometimes we just don't know what we don't know. And what we're learning in this series is that God has not called us to be naive. God's called us to be engaged. I think sometimes we're willfully blind. In other words, we refuse to give God credit for the great things in our life because everything's not perfect the way we think it should be. We refuse to be honest. We've got to choose to be honest about where we really are. I think sometimes, too, we're really resentful. This is a big thing. I'm going to talk about some of this today. As a result, right, like when we don't get our way, we get resentful, and we just want to, like a 2-year-old, just trash everything. Come on, anybody? It's this idea of equity versus equality. Resentfulness causes you to expect a similar outcome, right, without putting in the similar work and commitment. And I think as believers, before we start talking about the war on truth, we need to just take a deep breath in. Everyone do it. Come on, let it out. It's not that bad. You are blessed. You're able to come to church. Our brothers and sisters in China can't do that. You are blessed. There are places in the world where while we're going to our parties and enjoying time with loved ones, believers are being persecuted and crying out, God, come now. I just think that settling that in our heart allows us to engage topics like the truth and culture with just a little more humility and a little more grace. That's what I want to challenge you to do as we go into the war on truth. What do you think of when you hear the word truth? Probably a lot of things. Well, what do you mean when you say truth? You know, the truth is incredibly complicated, and yet at the same time, very, very simple. No other creation is as complex and complicated as human beings are, and this is why. Genesis 1:26, then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. They will rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, the whole earth, and the creatures that crawl on the earth. So God created man in his own image. He created him in the image of God. He created them male and female. Unlike any other thing that God made, we're conscious and we're self-aware. As we talk about truth, I think it's important. There's a couple things I want to hit here because there are really 2 dimensions of truth, and I want to be very specific at what I'm talking about. You and I, unlike any other creature, we are moral creatures. We are created with a moral code. We can be presented, like God said, with life and death, and we can actually choose of our free will. We're not just slime plus time, right? We're fashioned and made in the image of God. It's what makes you different than the beasts, right? That I hunt every October. Come on. There's a reason why I always win. There's a reason why God placed us here. We can make decisions. We can see patterns and we can make changes. That's uniquely human. We can think about what we're thinking about and change our life. Animals can't do that. Other lower reptiles and mammal, they can't do that. We're very, very unique. When we talk about truth, there are 2 dimensions of truth. There's what is, and then there's what you ought to do. Very important. Those are different. And many people trying to manipulate, push you into a certain way of thinking, they conflate those 2 things as if they're the same. They're absolutely not the same. Just because something is doesn't mean you ought to do something. For example, the chair you're sitting in. You're all sitting right now, right? That chair is. It is whether you're sitting in it or not. So why are you sitting in it, and why do you stand up during worship when you could be sitting in it? You see, there's a difference between this material world and what is, and then what you ought to do with what is. And here's the thing for people. You want to be real careful with this. Just because something is doesn't mean you ought to do it. We all know this, right? I mean, you want to go to a rated R movie. Come on. You're too young. You ask your mom or your dad, hey, can I go to that movie? And they say, no, you're too young. And you say, yeah, but so-and-so gets to go. What does mom say? Well, if so-and-so told you to jump off a bridge, would you do it too? Even mom knows there's a difference between what is and what you ought to do. We're talking about what you ought to do. We're talking about in light of what is. Sure, maybe they're related, but they are different. What you ought to do. What I want to do is I want to give you a hierarchy of truth. Now, we don't really like this word hierarchy. Okay, it's gotten a bad rap. But did you know hierarchy literally runs our world? You could use another word called order. Okay, order helps us. Hierarchies are a great blessing. For example, there's a hierarchy in your relationship with God. The 10 Commandments, right? How you relate to God, the first 4. Determines how you relate to people, the next 6. The number 10 is the number of test. The number 6 is the number of man. It's what you do. Hierarchies are incredibly important. There's hierarchies in your family. I'm sorry, but if you're married and you treat your spouse just like they're any other person, well, you're not going to be married very long because they're not just any other person. Do you treat your kids just like you treat anyone else's kids? Hierarchies run the world. They're a very, very good thing. You could almost say not only are they order, but they're a system or a framework for how you think. And what I want to do today, listen, the truth is complicated. I'm going to tell you why. But I'm going to help you with a biblical hierarchy that helps you understand what is true and what is not. Because the very fabric of reality, of truth, things that human beings have been settled on for thousands of years, right, are completely being deconstructed and thrown up into the air. And it's important as a Christian, you understand what's the biblical ideology, not far right, not far left. What's the biblical ideology or worldview in which I determine what I ought to do?